So I'm unfamiliar with all the different settings that people might be in, where you are. Like I say, I mean, this presentation is aimed more at preschools and those in foundation years. And so hopefully there's some useful thinking and tools within this today. So the plan for today is to think about how emotional well-being in families has been affected during the pandemic. Think about how to help vulnerable families during and after the lockdown. I know that we've had some movements towards being back in contact, but then yesterday there's been this, or well, this coming Monday is that potential step back to a bit more of a restriction. We'll talk a little bit about understanding how loss affects under 5-year-olds, and then explore ways to support children and families. It's important to think about families as a whole, and then think about how you might support each other during this time. Rightio. So I'll just quickly whiz through some of the more recent research that's been out there. I'm not going to be, it's not research heavy, but the early results from the COVID supporting parents, adolescents and children in epidemics. They did an online survey of 1,500 parents, and they suggested that in terms of the COVID-19 related worries and fears, they seem to be more prevalent in those aged 4 to 10 more than they are of the teenage population. So I think that's an important thing to recognise, is that the younger children are affected more during this time. And then the Family Fund researchers also said that there's been significant impacts on employment. Household costs have increased because everyone's at home. Formal support, so those that might have been offered by child and adult mental health services or by psychiatric support, has also declined. So people are getting less emotional support during this time. That many, nearly 90% of parents felt that the lockdown had impacted negatively on their children's behaviours, and that parents had also felt that it affected their own mental health too. Many parents have felt that, that they struggled to manage their children's emotions during this time, and that again they worried about their own mental health too. And many parents have requested that one of the key things that would help is mental health and well-being information. So where services have been unable to meet face-to-face, I mean, including us, we've had to move to online and telephone support during this time, in the most part. But just providing information can really make a difference. And then finally, this last piece of research, this is focusing more on those children that might have had special educational needs, which can already make a family feel quite vulnerable. So of the 5,000 parents that are interviewed, the highest stressor for the parents of children and young people with pre-existing difficulties was obviously their behaviour and their well-being during this time. They had a loss of structure and support even, so that's been a big worry and a stressor. But then it's a frequent stressor for parents of young people with SEN anyway, from what the report says. Half reported that there were concerns that a family or friend would catch COVID. A third reported that they were worried about missing school, so children might be returning with higher anxieties around that. And that only, less than a third were worried about catching the virus themselves. So I think I've also noticed that in older children as well, just from other research that I've read, that there's less concern for themselves and more concerns for the support network and those that they care for. Most parents felt that the children would benefit from support or advice regarding response to the COVID-19 and the period of isolation, and online written video material and personalised online contact. So, parents being able to talk directly with teachers or support staff in school can really make the difference in terms of support and improving mental well-being. Okay. So, I mean, a lot of this might sound like common sense to those of you here today, but these are the ways that children might be acting differently. So coming back, there might be a level of heightened anxiety. So that could be the anxiety of returning to, well, starting school, or for many, or returning to the places they were before, preschools and early years, about coming back to the place because things will feel very different. If you think about just my own experience, really, dropping my children off at their nursery, is that you're no longer able to go in and give the children a hug or anything. You have to stand very far away and just kind of drop them at the gate and encourage them to walk in themselves, which is really difficult for young children. There has been a big period of what you could consider universal loss. So communities as a whole, they might not have known somebody that had the virus or that actually passed away from the virus, but there's been this feeling of there might be someone in their community that has had it that they know of. So they might not know directly, but there is support. It's a universal feeling. During the break, not just for the loss of school, but also the loss of any additional services that families might be having, and also social interaction with their friends and with family has been different. Going back for most people, it's a period of massive transition. Like I say, schools and primary schools, schools and nurseries are very different. And what can happen is, in unfamiliar circumstances, there are novel responses. So children who might have been previously quite, what you might consider quite well adjusted to change, or that had been kind of quite content in themselves, might come back with unusual behaviours or acting out in different ways that you would not normally expect from them. So I think it's important when thinking about the under fives to consider the importance of attachment, particularly in those first 4 years. Attachment is key in terms of how young people see the world and understand the world. So for those of you that are, I think we're all familiar with the term attachment, but just to run through a few more details around it. So attachment develops through repeated satisfaction of the basic needs of young people, children. And this usually happens through what's called the arousal relaxation cycle. So that means that the parent or the caregiver perceives the infant signals. So, whether they're crying or, they're flopping around because they're tired, or being just generally quite crabby, that the parent then interprets these accurately, so he's kind of attuned to their need, reacts promptly, so sees the need and feels the need, and then reacts to that need. So this is, like I say, this is often termed as being attuned to a child's need. So being able to see what they need and then responding in an appropriate way. So where attunement doesn't happen or is delayed, that can create some difficulties in feeling attached to other caregivers. It's reinforced by further experience. So it's reinforced both on the parent side and on the child side. So, when the parent gets it right, they become much better at noticing those cues and being able to support those. And on kind of the biological side, having those needs met regularly makes the child, it creates the neurological pattern within their brain structure. So like I say, this is why the first 4 years are really important. So attachment behaviour, as adults of children, we see their distress and their need for emotional closeness. We those cues that we recognise are normally when, if socially appealing behaviour. So when they are attuned and we have got it right as caregivers, we get those kind of more positive cues like the smiling and this is general contentment. When there is a need for support, when they do have a basic need that needs fulfilling, they send out the pretty clear signals. The baby screeching, or toddlers, throwing things around, or younger children just generally acting out, pinching other children for attention, those kinds of things. And then also seeking closeness with others when they have that kind of basic need of feeling unheld, is that they then want to be physically close for tactile comfort. So like I say, attachment provides us with our working model for relationships, what we expect from others and the way we relate to the world. It's how, like I say, it's how we understand the world. So generally, if children have attuned parents and supportive parents, or they've not had any early traumas that have impacted upon that, or anything that might have prevented that. So if the parent might have mental health difficulties, or is for other reasons unavailable, if they're physically or mentally unwell, that can affect how they connect with other people. So yeah, it's safe. Secure attachment relationships provide a safe haven and secure base for us to explore the world. So that is where children feel able to then step away from their parents for periods of time and then come back and feel secure in the way of doing that. So when children are really young, that's going across the room to go and explore a toy and then bring it back to the parent. And as they get older, that's things like going to school and being able to be in school and to feel safe and secure in that, and then come back. And for those children that have good attachment style, they're much better at connecting with peers, with siblings, with extended family, teachers, generally with the start of school. So how we might support children who've been affected by the pandemic. It's been a great period of young people being at home and having much better opportunity to turn to their parents or to others at home for that support. So having to return to nursery, preschool, or to start a foundation year at school, it can be unsettling. So as professionals, it's about offering opportunities for us to be that secure base that would normally come from the parent. So being as much as we can, I know that there are obviously big groups in school and in preschool, to be attuned as much as we can to individual children. So there are ways of managing separation anxiety, which I have mentioned on a previous webinar, but I'll run through them again. So things like having badges and hearts. So things like you can get these you can either have sewn on badges or created badges. I've seen it used before with each parent, the parent and the child each has the same badge. So that can either be something that's sewn onto the clothing inside, or a drawn-on heart on their wrist. So not very kind of explicit, not in the way, but what it is, it's about letting the child know that that's a connection with their parent or caregiver. So they might be at home, and that if the child is feeling unsettled, or even if the parent's feeling unsettled, they can kind of look at the badge, give it a little stroke, just kind of feel connected. Also, it's important to recognise the importance of what we would consider transitional objects. So what we mean by transitional objects are those things that are representative of the parent. So things like comfort blankets, teddy bears. I know with infection control, many places you're not allowed to bring these things in, but it might be a case that children have a picture of their parent, or even if they're a teddy bear, in their book bag or somewhere away from everything else, and something that is easily cleanable if it needs to be. So that's another useful thing, is being able to recognise how challenging the change can be, and that they might need something that represents their parent. So play is obviously very important. So being able to be creative. I know that there's we've had to obviously reduce some of the things that children are able to use in school. So for example, here where we have been able to meet face to face with young people, we've had to take away things like sand trays and Play-Doh, and concentrate more on the plastic, cleanable, sterilisable objects. So having those on hand, or to be able to draw and write, well, not necessarily write, but being able to draw in colour and express with art, because children of the under 5, they don't necessarily have the emotional vocabulary to share how they're feeling. It can also be really useful to help them to understand germs and infection. So using simple language. There's a book out there that was written by I think it's Axel Scheffler, I think is his name. He was the person that illustrated the Gruffalo books and all those kind of books. So they're very child friendly, and there's content in there that kind of explains a little bit about germs and the virus itself. There's lots of books and materials out there that you can have at story time around understanding the virus and the importance of washing hands. I think we've all, I don't know if people are still doing it, singing happy birthday to germs twice, all of those kinds of things. So the guidelines on hand washing hasn't changed. It's also important to consider, how the parents feel about the return to school or to preschool. If we're thinking about parents acting as the secure base, if they're feeling anxious and they're unable to kind of hold their own emotions to then understand or recognise those of the children, that can unsettle them, unsettle the children, that is. So being able to speak with parents and kind of see how they feel about going back, the children going back, and then also explaining or answering questions. I'm sure people have been quite explicit in their workplaces around what measures have been put in place, but helping the parents to understand them and why can also reduce their anxieties. Talking with parents about what language they've used previously, with helping the children to understand why lockdown has happened and what the coronavirus is. So things like very simple language, things around saying that there's a big illness and we just have to make sure that everyone keeps their hands clean so we don't spread it to other people. Those kinds of things. So understanding what the terms parents have already used, and then using those where possible. And also helping parents to understand that how they can be that secure base. Again, helping them to understand that they might feel anxious, and recognizing that and saying, being able to talk about their child and understand how they might be acting differently will help you in your settings. So thinking about how bereavements might be different at this time. So during the lockdown, and it continues to be so, there have been a very big impact on funerals and memorials. So funerals and memorials offer an opportunity for children and adults of all ages to have some sense of saying goodbye, and the term lots of people use is closure around a death. This is particularly true where we might not have seen family members for some period of time, and then they might pass away. Be that through COVID or through cancer or accidents, even lots of different reasons people might have passed away. And so being able to participate in funerals is important. So where that's not been able to happen, there are lots of things you can do around helping children to understand and to have that memorial. I'll run through some of those in a moment. There might also be within families a feeling of disenfranchised grief. Now, what that is it's where, because within families, the reactions to somebody passing away can be very diverse and very different to each other. So, there might be members of the family that just aren't talking about it and just kind of holding themselves and not wanting to upset the children. Whereas there might be, some of younger children might be acting out, and then older children might be following the lead of their parents in not really talking about it. So disenfranchised grief is essentially saying that where there are those differences is that children, adults don't feel validated in how they feel. So because people are reacting in different ways, they don't feel they're able to feel upset about it. So for example, if it's a family member that they've not seen for a long, long time and then they die, are they allowed to feel upset? And a lot of the time, particularly in younger children, they follow the lead of their parents. So if the parent is expressing how they feel, it gives permission to the children to do the same. Also during this time, losses might feel quite sudden. Like I say, if we've not seen family members or there have been limits on being able to see them in hospital, it might feel very sudden. And particularly, if it's a COVID-related death, they can be quite speedy as well in terms of progression of the illness. And there's also lots of concurrent losses that come with bereavement at the moment, in that there have been obviously financial challenges for many families, losses of being able to feel socially connected to the school, to friends, to extended family, not being able to visit. And again, this might reoccur with the fact that we're going back to seeing only 6 people at a time. I know that it's obviously different for larger events and schools, but so for young children, so those under 5, their understanding of death and dying is potentially quite limited. They are beginning to understand the concept of death, but they might not realise that it's permanent. They might see it as a two-way door. So where somebody might die, they might, a couple of days later say, oh, when can we see grandma again, to their parents? Which means, in the most part, parents might need to repeatedly explain what has happened. Children might need that before moving on to what would seem unrelated questions or conversations quite quickly. Young children are very good at kind of, the term they use is muddy puddles. So they splash in the muddy puddle of talking about death and dying, and then they jump back out again very, very quickly. And that's perfectly normal. The children do that. Another part of the under 5s is the idea of the theory of mind. So for those of you that are unfamiliar with this term, it essentially means that children under 5 struggle to understand how other people might be perceiving the world. So I've put here this Wimmer and Perner. So they did an experiment where they put marbles in a Smartie tube, put the lid on, and then they asked the children, well, how would Johnny in the next room, what would he think was within this tube? And their children would all say he would think it's marbles, because they know it's marbles, but they would not expect that the other child would see a Smarties tube and expect Smarties. So the way this relates to bereavement and loss is that they might not understand that parents, siblings, or other people's family members or other people in the community might be perceiving the world differently, or that might be understanding the death of somebody in a different way and getting quite upset about it, or being acting differently around it. And this continues on. Like I said, this is generally more typical in the under 5s, but this is an additional challenge for those with on the autistic spectrum, throughout, depending on where they are on the spectrum, as they get older as well, just being able to understand other people's emotional state. So yeah, the one thing to recognise though is that although children might not understand the permanency of death, and that people are no longer here, they do understand or recognise when someone or something is missing. So that goes right down to very early years, and so being able to recognise that that a person's not there that normally would be. And again, this is not necessarily just about bereavement, but just generally about the lockdown, that there's been a feeling of missing, and they act out in different ways, which I'll explain in a moment. So the one thing that can really help with that is having that attunement with their caregivers, and the caregivers recognise how the mental state of the children and respond appropriately. So I'll leave this slide up just for a little minute. So in understanding more specifically how under fives understand death and how they might be presenting. So when, with babies, long before they can talk, they are likely to react to grief of their main caregiver. So if the caregiver is struggling with a loss, the children will respond to that. Like I say, it's a reciprocal relationship when it comes to their attachment and that attunement. So they don't have an understanding, but they will understand understanding of death, but they do recognise when something is not there. So that feeling of abandonment might create more clingy behaviour than usual, that kind of desire to get reassigned attunements with their parent. Because they don't have the language to express their feeling, their anxiety and insecurity might come out as crying that can't be consoled. And again, wanting to be with their parent alongside a lot of the time. And again, this is not necessarily about death and dying, but even just the lockdown, and the return to school. I've noticed that my 4-year-old is by my side all the time at the moment, because of that period of them going to some sort of normality. Feeding and sleeping routines might be disrupted, and they just generally act miserable. So as the children get older, so coming up through toddlers into 5-year-olds, their understanding is increasing. So they might have more questions, but they still don't fully appreciate permanency. They might start to have anxieties around the everyday practicalities, as well as increased separation anxiety, even when left for short periods. So going from the dining room to the living room, those kinds of things. Children at this age tend to play with the words of being alive and dead. A lot of their play, is this character's dead, and then suddenly he's alive again, and revived by other characters in their storytelling. And there can be an expectation that someone that has died will return. And then when they realise when it's explained to them that that's not going to happen, there can be obviously disappointment and sadness at that. So there can be real fluctuations in emotion. They may struggle with the concept of no life, and so rather than death, and so they might need reassurance that dead people I no longer feel in the same way as alive people do. So there are some use of pictures can be really beneficial. In fact, what I might do is send out there's some imagery resources that we use at the hospice for those with special needs, and also those really young children. I can send those out to everybody as well after today's presentation. So how young children might react to a loss. Again, there's that period of searching behaviour. So typically they're looking for the person, searching. So going, different rooms or different places. Where was the last time they saw them? Being able to see them. There can be a regression. So those children that are toddlers or starting school might to act in much more of a babyish way, wanting, using more baby talk into, the kind of, used to be called motherese, that kind of gagas and goo-goos and those kinds of things. They might also revert to wetting and soiling at bedtimes, but also during the daytime. And there can be some regressed play, so wanting to play with some of those toys that they might have used to when they were younger, or wanting to play with younger siblings' toys more than their own. There can be a greater increased separation anxiety and a desire for more tactile comfort, so wanting to hug more, wanting to be attached to their parent's leg quite a lot. And then equally, because they might not have the language to express how they're feeling, their emotions come out as behaviours. So there can be frustration, destructive behaviour. We're talking about building things up and then knocking them down, and even hitting other children. And so being able to recognise what might be going on for that family and for that child helps to then, like I say, be attuned to their need rather than being too punitive. We need to obviously keep the boundaries of how our settings are. So we can't have children hitting each other and doing things like that. And so if there are any measures that you might have in place, timeout areas or whatnot, still using those, but just also recognising it. There can be, even in younger children, big sleep disturbances following a loss. Lots of protesting at night time. If you think about it, that is a separation. Being separate from their parents and their caregivers. When they go to sleep, they're not with them. They might be waking in the night and getting into their parents' beds. They might be having nightmares. Again, young children see the world a lot more in images than being able to use the language. And in a lot of that comes out in their sleep and how they are. So it's important to help parents to recognise how to reinforce good sleep patterns, being able to settle them nicely, and having stories, things like that, and a routine around bath times and bedtimes is really helpful. There also might be a period of being quite withdrawn and being subdued, and that's even true of the really young children, babies and toddlers. That they might lose interest in the things that they used to do before, and just want to sit and just stare, and which sounds upsetting to us as adults, but it's part of their grieving process. And most children are able to, might have periods of that, but then, they have periods of all of these even. It's normal behaviour, and then they come back out of it as they start to feel more connected and to kind of express. It's also why it's important to kind of recognise those feelings and to support them wherever we can through play, cuddles, whatever it seems appropriate at the time. So when thinking about how to support bereaved children and families holistically, the primary things we should be focusing on are their basic needs. So this is a pyramidal model from the National Bereavement Alliance and the Children's Bereavement Network. And this is the advice they give to all professionals and to families even, is that meeting those basic needs, making sure that they're fed, that they've slept well, that they're in a place where they feel safe and supported. Meeting those needs gives them the resilience to cope with many of life's issues. Secondary to that, being able to say goodbye and have rituals around death and dying. So, where children have been unable to attend funerals or parents haven't felt that it was appropriate to attend a funeral, having something more personal. So that could be eating, if it was a grandparent that died, eating their grandparent's favourite meal, or letting off a balloon with a message attached to it to go to heaven, depending on what their kind of spiritual or religious understanding is. You can also do things like have more going to places where there are where special memories are held of that person. So that might be a park or grassland, or even things like theme parks and libraries. I know libraries are closed at the moment, but being able to visit those places that help children to feel connected to that person can act as a good substitute. And then I know the typeface is a little bit small on this presentation here, but the next step would be to give information to parents about what's normal in grief in children. So, we've discussed a few of those today. We do have more information on our 565 website. So, please feel free to direct families there, or just have a look yourselves and familiarise yourself what's kind of normal, if you want to call it that. And also recognising when it's important to seek more support. So where things, how a child might be presenting is becoming much more ingrained and might need additional input from external services. And the next step would be to have a supportive response from those existing networks. So, we're talking here about schools, we're talking about external agencies, but we're also talking about how families, helping families to recognise how being connected with each other can help with bereavement. And then moving up, looking at getting external support. So those little blue blocks there are around when to make or when to put in extra provision in schools or in preschools to get additional support for staff even, as well as the individuals, the children and the parents. And then the pinnacle there, and this is kind of where we are as a service, the 565, is where there might be very kind of complicated circumstances around a bereavement, where it might have been, we're talking here about COVID deaths, if we're thinking about it, or where there might be pre-existing vulnerabilities, where there might be mental health issues within the family that might need a bit more unpicking and more kind of professional intervention. So looking at that pyramid, if we're thinking about bereavement and just generally how to support children and families, the bulk of the support and the bulk of the children would just need those basic needs met. And then, as you're going up, it's a requirement, it's less and less needed. So, when you get to the top there, it'll only be a few children, hopefully, that would need that more direct intervention. And that most children and families cope well without the need for additional support. So the ways that specifically that you might be able to help parents or young children to talk about and understand bereavement and loss. So there's things like doing remembrance activities with the children, or encouraging families to do that themselves. So creating memory jars. So you can do them in lots of different ways. You can make them with filling sand up in a jar and linking those to particular memories. You could write memories down on pieces of paper. You could print pictures and put them in a larger jar. Or, particularly for the under fives, it might be more appropriate just to kind of draw their memories and keep them in there. This is also a useful thing to put within a memory box. So a memory box is quite simply, as it sounds, you can get cardboards. There are companies that sell wooden ones to keep all of those things that are memories of the person that's passed away and linked with them. So particularly with the under fives, it's useful to have those as kind of multi-sensory where possible. So, not just having pictures in there or memory jars in those boxes, but having things like objects, so tactile objects they can feel and feel connected to the person who's died. Even things like smells as well. A lot of soft fabrics will obviously maintain a certain level of smell, but having a little bottle of that person's perfume or aftershave, it's a really useful way of connecting those memories. There's lots of books out there on the market for helping families to talk about death and dying. So for the under fives, the ones that we tend to recommend are Goodbye Mog. So Mog is it's a whole series of books with Mog. I'm sure you're all familiar with them. But Goodbye Mog is when Mog dies and is then floating over the family unseen and just seeing how they are coping after mother's passed away. The Goodbye Book is another good one, really. So it's about, as you can see from the front cover there, it's about a fish whose cohabiting fish dies, and it's talking about the loss that that fish feels when that person's not there. And then the final one that we recommend is I Miss You, A First Look at Death. So this goes, it's an exploration of understanding illness into bereavement as well, and the ways that we might remember those that have died. So a useful book to have to help children establish how they want to remember the people that have died, along with that discussion with parents. There's also movies, which are a very, very light touch in terms of helping families to discuss issues around death and dying. So Disney do a great deal in terms of loss, and kind of more, a lot of their films have certain themes for these days. So Coco, for those of you that are unfamiliar with it, it's about a young boy who, on the Day of the Dead in Mexico, it's about a memorial, and he goes into the underworld to meet relatives, to learn more about his own family. It's a really heartfelt story. It's a lovely one. Not scary in any way. I know going to the underworld might seem like a scary prospect, but it's very colourful and very well done. Big Hero 6 is about a young boy whose brother dies, and his brother is an inventor and created this health robot, Baymax. And Baymax is accidentally activated and tries to fix the young boy's grief. And so it's helping children to understand that loss is not necessarily something that can be fixed. It's about something that you learn to live with through the support of friends and family. And it's okay to enjoy life after somebody's died. There are very big kind of superhero influences in this film as well, which I think really connects with a lot of young boys in particular. Not to be too gender specific about it, but I think for boys that connects well. And then Up as well. So Up, although not directly about bereavement, it does cope with the idea of loss, and it's about this journey of this gentleman who's recently bereaved, and this young boy that helps him to recognise that life could still be fun, and that life does go on. And there's particularly around where children might have anxieties or worries or thoughts that are troubling them, and this is particularly around bedtimes as well as a useful thing, is having a worry monster. So it's where the child might write or draw their feelings with the support of their parents, and then the worry monster eats their worries to help them clear their mind before they then start their day, or at the end of the day. It's really useful. The important thing to remember with all of these activities is that they're best done with the support of parents or with supportive staff at school. That it's not a case of just giving the children the book and then hoping that they grasp what the content is about. It's about having these films and books and activities and helping them to process, connect with some of the feelings of the characters in the story and how they might be feeling. So it does require some kind of connective work and achievement. So again, as I said previously, there are lots of kind of these typical behaviours in bereavement, but where these become prolonged or they worsen even, it's recognising them as what you would call red flags for the need for additional support, either in school or from an external agency. So prolonged periods of sleeplessness, obviously that's going to affect on their ability to, loss of periods of sleeplessness and loss of appetite are going to affect on their ability to concentrate, particularly in school, or just generally their mood when they're in. So if those worsen, then that has big impacts. They might have a period of social withdrawal, so they might be becoming more and more reclusive to the point where they it becomes a worry for parents. And so recognising that as maybe a point where you need to get additional support, or where there is excessive aggressive behaviour. There can be some destructive behaviour in bereavement, but also, where that becomes their lead reaction to things, is the point where you might be looking to explore additional support, either in school, at home, or from a professional agency. So there are lots of places that you can get advice. So in terms of kind of just telephone advice, you've got Winston's Wish, which is obviously a very big, well-recognised national charity. They've produced lots of books, so things like Muddles, Puddles and Sunshine is one of the bigger ones there for supporting children in bereavement. It's always useful to have one of those on school site if that's something that it's always better to have it and ready when you need it rather than just not have it when you do need it. Grief Encounter, they offer great support in terms of for children, as for maybe not the younger children, but certainly for older children to actually ring in themselves and to talk about things. Young Minds, they offer support for general mental health. Along with that is obviously bereavement. And then you've got the Children's Bereavement Network. So there, that pyramid that I showed previously, that's from there. They've got lots of really useful resources online for professionals and for families as well to use. And then more locally, if you feel that it's appropriate to make a referral onwards, you've got us here at the 565 service. So we support those affected by progressive illness. Unfortunately, due to the way that we're funded, we're not able to offer support for if there's any accidents or suicides or things like that. And we cover the east of Suffolk. So so we're based at St Elizabeth Hospice. So we cover the geographical area of our patients. We've got Nicky's Way, so that's the Children's Bereavement Service of St Nicholas Hospice. So they cover the west of Suffolk, and they are an open access service. So as long as families are in the west and they're under in their postcode, they can offer bereavement support for all types of loss, their bereavement loss, so inclusive of suicides, accidents, and those kinds of things. You've got Nelson's Journey, so they're based up in Norfolk, and so they support anyone with an NR postcode in a similar way to Nicky's Way. And then you've got Stars Grief Support, which is North East Essex, that's St Helena Hospice. And I think they typically support those like us that are affected by palliative and progressive illness. And then Cruise Ipswich also have a small team of a young person's team there to support. So finally, really, it's important to recognise how to look after yourselves and your colleagues. On the return to work, you may have your own anxieties. Lots of even with our service, we've seen lots of people that have been shielding, and now we're returning to working on site, and that has created some anxieties. It can do. So being able to discuss these with your line managers or with colleagues, and making a plan ahead can reduce the chances of risk to yourself, but also any distress to your well-being. And when it comes to bereavement, or even helping children with high levels of anxiety and distress from the pandemic and the lockdown, you can't always make it better. You can only do your best, and about being part of that is being able to look after yourself. If you're able to care for yourself, then you're much better at being able to attune to the needs of another person, be that a child or an adult. So if you are struggling, finding a colleague or somebody, a line manager that you can talk to about things, keeping perspective within your own life, having that work-life boundary as much as you can. And if you are finding it difficult, treat yourself, establish your own kind of self-care, You know, for some people that might be, the treat might be going for a run. For others, it's, you know, going for a meal or having that packet of biscuits that you've had in the cupboard all this time. Being able to realise that you can't do this by yourself, and if you are struggling with the support of a child, being able to feedback and get advice from colleagues, or you know, just being able to reflect on how you feel in the situation, and having a regular discussion with those children that might be have, you know, additional needs that you need to be supporting. Having a regular meeting with your manager or senior leader to reflect back on how things are going, and to be able to discuss where, you know, what might be the next best step. So yeah, when a family member dies, you know, a child's life will change forever. But you know, with the support, children can adjust and, you know, still flourish and still have full lives. And part of that is having you know, those professionals and that family around them to help them to understand, to recognise and to process their feelings. So just finally, I just want to explain a little bit more about the 565 service. So like I said, I worked previously within the emotional wellbeing team, and then in response to COVID, we've created the children's service by itself. And our criteria has moved from working just with family members of patients to now working with those affected by progressive illness or bereavement and progressive illness. So we support prior to somebody passing away as well. We've expanded the resources on our website recently, so I do encourage everyone to have a look at those. And we are also producing more, well, there's already child-friendly content on there, but it's updated regularly, appropriately, depending on what's going on, really, nationally and locally. So due to social distancing measures, we are trying to move back towards some face-to-face work, but primarily we're only able to offer face-to-face sessions online or offering telephone support to parents and carers. So for those under 5, we're not able to offer direct work with children just because of confidentiality and the challenges of trying to do online work in that way. But what we can do is speak with parents and offer them guidance and a space to talk, and to help them to reduce their anxiety so they're much better at supporting their children. So where children are between the ages of 5 and 14, we would offer online, but that would be parent and child. And then for anyone that's 14 to 18, we offer that as, because they're deemed competent, or if they're deemed competent to talk for them on their own behalf, safely, privately, we offer them the work directly just with them. So if you needed to make a referral, please do just give us a call on our emotional wellbeing inquiry line, or email into us. It's probably one of the other best options. And then just the kind of our final slide here, I'll leave it up there. If anyone wants to become involved in supporting us as a hospice, as you can probably imagine, having to close all of our shops and to cancel some of our bigger events has created a financial challenge for us. And so we just need to, where possible, if people can support us, we'd be very grateful. Okay, now I'm going to leave it there. Did we have any questions? Okay, I've just had a look at over to Harriet, and she said there's questions. So what will happen now is I'll stop the recording, and then the presentation will go on our on the 565 website. If you did have any further questions that you or anybody that you're supporting in school and you had wanted more specific advice around that, please do get in contact with me. You can use the emotional wellbeing inquiry email address that I'd put up previously. So emotional wellbeing at St Elizabeth Hospice. I'm always happy to chat with people, even if it's not direct work supporting the wider elements of loss, that, you know, we can at least give you some guidance and advice as to where to go for additional support. And We will also be sending you all out a feedback form just to review how you felt the webinar was, whether we met the need, and also to identify if there's any further things that we can present or give information on that would help. Okay. Well, it's nice to, I know I can't see you all, but it's nice to have you all here today. And I do wish you all the best for the rest of your day and for your week. All right.